China had seen formidable women before. Fu Hao of the Shang dynasty commanded armies and led warriors in battle under her husband, King Wu Ding. She was a military leader, a high priestess and an advisor, but she never ruled alone. No woman had ever wielded ultimate power over the empire. No woman had ever claimed the dragon throne. That would change with Wu Zetian. She was born in 624 CE, into a world where a woman's fate was dictated by men before she even drew her first breath. Her father, Wu Shihuo, was a timber merchant who climbed the ranks of local politics, a rare case of social mobility in a rigid society. Her mother came from an aristocratic family, offering Wu a glimpse into the world of the elite, but in the strict hierarchy of Imperial China, even noble women had little influence. Their duty was clear: marry well, bear sons, and accept their place in the shadows. But Wu Zetian was different. From childhood she showed an unrelenting curiosity, a hunger for knowledge. Unlike most girls who were taught only domestic skills, she was allowed to study history, literature, and strategy. She read the lives of emperors, memorized military campaigns, and sharpened her mind like a blade. At 14, she was sent to the Imperial palace as a concubine of Emperor Taizong, the most powerful man in the Middle Kingdom. It was a gilded prison. Hundreds of women, each vying for a fleeting moment of the emperor's attention, disappeared into obscurity. Their names forgotten, their ambitions smothered under silk robes and courtly ritual. Wu Zetian was not content to be another nameless concubine. She distinguished herself not through beauty or flattery, but through intelligence. She became a literary assistant in Taizong's court, a role unheard of for a concubine. She had access to official documents, state records, and the inner workings of imperial administration. She observed. She learned. She understood that power was not merely inherited, it was cultivated. When Emperor Taizong died in 649 CE, Wu Zetian's fate should have been sealed. By law, imperial concubines who had not borne sons were sent to Buddhist convents to live out their days in silent devotion. It was a final exile from court, a symbolic burial of women who no longer had a place in the empire. Few ever returned, and yet Wu Zetian did. History does not record precisely how she defied tradition, but she had already caught the eye of Taizong's son, the new Emperor Gaozong. Some say their affair began while Taizong still lived, a dangerous secret hidden within the vast walls of the palace. Others believe that after Taizong's death, she maneuvered her way back into power, ensuring that Gaozong never forgot her. The means are uncertain, but the result is undeniable. Against all precedent, Wu Zetian re-entered the palace. The court was scandalized. No woman had ever returned from a convent to reclaim a place among the emperor's consorts. The existing empress, Wang, and her most influential rival, Consort Xiao, believed themselves secure in their positions. Wu Zetian was merely another concubine, another figure in the emperor's collection. Neither of them saw her as a threat. It was the last mistake they would ever make. Not long after Wu Zetian's return, tragedy struck the imperial household. The emperor's infant daughter was found dead in her crib, her tiny body lifeless, the cause unknown. Suspicion immediately fell upon Empress Wang. After all, who had the most to lose with Wu Zetian back in court? Who had the greatest reason to remove a child who could strengthen Wu's position? The emperor was consumed with grief. Convinced of his wife's treachery, he stripped Wang of her title and deposed her. Wu Zetian took her place as Empress of China. But history is rarely kind to its villains, nor is it always fair to its rulers. Some records claim that Empress Wang was innocent, that Wu Zetian orchestrated her own daughter's murder to frame a rival. A calculated act of cruelty designed to clear her path to power. Others argue that Wang and Consort Xiao had their own schemes, that the palace was already riddled with intrigue before Wu Zetian ever arrived. No evidence survives to prove either claim. The truth remains buried in the whispers of a long-dead dynasty, another secret locked within the Forbidden City. One fact is beyond dispute. Wu Zetian had risen, not as a concubine, not as a mere consort, but as the most powerful woman in the empire. And the world had yet to witness the full extent of what she was capable of. The Emperor of China was going blind. It was not the work of an assassin's poison, nor the blade of a usurper. It was slow, relentless, an affliction that stole his sight and left him weakened. Gaozong, the son of heaven, ruler of the Middle Kingdom, was becoming a shadow of himself. But the empire did not collapse. The throne was still occupied, decrees were still issued, and orders were still followed. The hand that held the imperial seal may have trembled, but the mind behind it was sharper than ever. Zetian did not simply rule alongside her husband. She ruled in his place. From behind the silken curtains of the imperial court, she became the true force of governance. Ministers who had once scoffed at the thought of a woman wielding power now bowed before her authority. Some saw her as a stabilizing force, an iron-willed leader guiding the empire through an uncertain era. Others saw her as a usurper, a woman who had stolen a throne that was never meant for her. In 683 CE, Emperor Gaozong died. His son Zhongzong was named the rightful heir. The court expected Zetian to step aside, to return to the traditional role of Empress Dowager, an advisor in the background. But power is not so easily surrendered. Zhongzong made the mistake of believing he could rule independently. Within weeks he began to issue decrees without his mother's approval. It was a fatal misstep. Zetian removed him from the throne, exiled him and installed her younger son Ruizong in his place. But Ruizong was emperor in name only. The true ruler of China remained unchanged. For years, Zetian governed as Empress Dowager, wielding power behind the throne. But she had spent a lifetime defying expectations, dismantling barriers, and rewriting the rules. Why stop now? In 690 CE, she did the unthinkable. She abolished the Tang dynasty, the very institution that had placed her in power, and declared the birth of a new era. The Tang was dead. In its place, she established the Zhou Dynasty, the first and only dynasty in Chinese history founded by a woman. The emperor was no longer a son, a husband, or a puppet. The emperor was Zetian. The Confucian elite recoiled in horror. The scholars, the bureaucrats, the ministers who had spent lifetimes upholding the sanctity of male rule could do nothing as she took the throne. But the empire did not crumble. China had never seen a female emperor before, and it would never see one again. But the sky did not fall, or the people did not rebel. She surrounded herself with capable ministers, removed corrupt officials, and expanded the civil service examination system, ensuring that only the most qualified governed the empire. She abolished hereditary aristocracy, stripping power from noble families who had long manipulated court politics. Talent, not lineage, became the key to advancement. But beneath these reforms, beneath the stability, there was an undercurrent of fear. The secret police, once a whispered tool of control, became an ever-present force in Chang'an. Rivals did not simply lose power, they vanished. Some were exiled, others executed. The ministers learned to tread carefully, for an unguarded word could mean death. Her enemies were waiting. The noble families had not forgotten their humiliation. The Confucian elite had not forgotten their resentment. And her sons, the very ones she had placed on the throne, had not forgotten their exile. For now she was untouchable. But even the most powerful emperors cannot rule forever. Zetian was no passive ruler, no mere figurehead clutching to a throne she had stolen. She was a reformer, a strategist, a ruler in the truest sense. Her reign was not about survival. It was about reshaping China, about bending an empire to her vision. And for all the controversy that surrounded her, no one could deny that she was effective. The foundations of Imperial China had long rested in the hands of the aristocracy. High-ranking officials were chosen based on family lineage rather than merit, positions of power inherited rather than earned. Zetian saw this as a system that had stagnated, a machine in desperate need of dismantling. She expanded the imperial examination system, a rigorous set of tests that determined government appointments based on knowledge and ability rather than birth. It was a radical move. It weakened the entrenched noble families who had long controlled the imperial court, cutting off their influence. But for China, it was a turning point. The empire's governance was no longer dictated solely by aristocrats, but was open to talented scholars and officials from all levels of society. Her reforms extended beyond the government. She understood that an empire's strength depended on its economy, its ability to sustain itself and expand. She enacted agricultural policies that redistributed land, empowering small farmers instead of large landowning elites. She strengthened China's irrigation systems, ensuring that crops flourished even in times of drought. Trade thrived under her rule, as she expanded the Silk Road and secured foreign alliances that bolstered economic stability. Under her leadership, China grew prosperous. Yet, for all the progress she brought, her rule was far from gentle. Power is never maintained without force, and Wu Zetian understood that better than anyone. She had reached the throne by eliminating her enemies, and she maintained it the same way. She created a secret police force, an organization that did not merely monitor opposition, it crushed it. Informants lurked in the shadows of the palace, listening for treason, for whispers of discontent. Ministers, generals, scholars, so anyone who opposed her found themselves accused of conspiracy. Some vanished overnight. Some were exiled. Some were executed. Fear settled over the court like a thick fog, and in the great halls of Chang'an, silence was often the loudest sound. Her enemies called her a tyrant, but the empire did not crumble. It thrived. The roads were safer than they had been in generations. The bureaucratic system ran with efficiency. The economy flourished. Even those who despised her could not argue with the result. But governing an empire was not just about politics or economics. It was about ideology. And Wu Zetian knew that Confucianism, the dominant philosophy of China, was her greatest obstacle. Confucian scholars had long preached the doctrine of a rigid social order, one in which women were subordinate to men. To them, Wu Zetian was an abomination, an unnatural ruler who had defied the cosmic order. They whispered against her in their scrolls, their essays, their teachings. She could not allow them to control the narrative. She turned instead to Buddhism, a belief system that offered her a different kind of legitimacy. She commissioned monasteries, temples, and Buddhist texts, elevating the faith to new heights. She declared herself the reincarnation of Maitreya, the prophesied Buddha of the future, a ruler destined to bring prosperity and enlightenment. The Confucian elite may have rejected her, but the Buddhist clergy embraced her. Across the empire, monks and scholars praised her reign, spreading the idea that Wu Zetian was not just a ruler, she was a divine force, chosen to lead. Yet for all her brilliance, for all her success, time remained undefeated. No emperor rules forever, and Wu Zetian's enemies had not forgotten their humiliation. They had not forgotten their exile, and they were waiting for the moment when the woman who had defied history would finally falter. The walls were closing in. By the dawn of the 8th century, the empire still bore the mark of Wu Zetian's rule. The roads, the bureaucratic reforms, the economic prosperity, all of it was a testament to the empire she had built. But the woman herself was fading. Age had begun to erode the power that had once seemed indomitable. Wu Zetian, once sharp, calculating, and unstoppable, was growing frail. Her body weakened, and the ministers who had long feared her began to sense opportunity. The noble families she had sidelined, the Confucian scholars she had silenced, the sons she had exiled, all of them had waited. And now the moment had arrived. In 705 CE, a coup was orchestrated within the palace. It was not a violent rebellion, not a bloody war for the throne. It was something quieter, something more insidious. The court, the very machinery she had controlled with absolute authority, turned against her. The ministers, once obedient, now whispered in secret meetings. They declared that China could not be ruled by a woman, that it was time to restore the Tang dynasty and return the empire to its rightful state. Wu Zetian did not fight. There was no final battle, no desperate stand. She stepped down, yielding to the inevitable. Some say she knew the end had come, that she had already won the war by proving that a woman could rule in her own right. Others claim she was simply too weak, too tired to resist any longer. The truth remains lost to time. The Zhou Dynasty was erased from the records as though it had never existed. The Tang was restored, and with it the sons she had once discarded were placed back onto the throne. Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in China's history, was sent into quiet exile. She lived out her final months away from the palace she had once commanded. And then, in the cold winter of 705 CE, she died. Her final mystery lay in her tomb. She was buried in the Qianling Mausoleum, alongside her husband, Emperor Gaozong. But unlike every emperor before her, her tomb bore no inscription, no name, no title, no grand proclamation of her achievements. It was a blank stone standing in silence. Was it her own decision, a final enigma left for history to decipher? Or was it an act of humiliation, a deliberate attempt to erase her from the annals of time? But history does not forget. Centuries later, her reign remains one of the most controversial in China's long past. Was she a tyrant, a ruler who governed through fear and violence? Or was she a visionary, a woman who shattered the barriers of her time and strengthened an empire through reform? Her critics say she was ruthless. They are not wrong. But neither are those who argue that she was one of the most effective rulers China had ever seen. She proved that power was not reserved for men, that a woman could sit upon the dragon throne, that an empire could be governed by intellect and strategy rather than tradition. Her name may not be carved on her tomb, but it is etched into history. Whether as a ruler to be feared or one to be admired, Wu Zetian remains a singular force, China's first and only female emperor.